My name is Oliver Puff, Inspector Oliver Puff, and today I'm going to tell you a very interesting real-life story. Australia, January 26, 1966. It was a public holiday, Australia Day, and the summer sun blazed over the city of Adelaide. Families packed the beaches, children laughed, the world felt safe. 3 children left their home that morning to catch a bus to the beach. They were ordinary kids, a big sister who liked to look after the others, a middle child full of energy, and a 4-year-old boy just happy to go wherever his sisters went. They never came home, and to this day, nearly 60 years later, no one knows what happened to Jane, Arnna, and Grant Beaumont. To understand this story, you have to understand the world the Beaumont children lived in. Jim and Nancy Beaumont were an ordinary working-class family living in the suburb of Somerton Park on the southern outskirts of Adelaide. Jim worked as a traveling salesman. Nancy stayed home with the kids. They were a tight family, not wealthy, but happy. Their 3 children were Jane, the eldest at 9 years old, responsible, the kind of kid who took charge. Then came Arnna, 7, bright-eyed and adventurous. And the youngest was Grant, only 4, still small enough to hold your hand crossing the street. The beach at Glenelg was only a few kilometers away, a short bus ride down the coast. The Beaumont children had made the trip many times before. It was completely normal, completely safe. At least, that's what everyone believed. On the morning of January 26th, Nancy gave the 3 children their bus fare and some extra change for an ice cream or a snack. She reminded them of the rules. Be good, don't talk to strangers, be back by midday. Jane nodded. She knew the drill. They walked out the front door at 10 o'clock in the morning. It was the last time their parents ever saw them. When midday came and went, Nancy Beaumont wasn't immediately alarmed. Kids lose track of time. She waited for the next bus, then the next one. By early afternoon, the waiting had turned to worry. By evening, worry had turned to fear. Jim Beaumont arrived home and immediately went to search the beach himself. When he returned empty-handed, the family called the police at 7:30 that evening. And so began one of the largest missing children investigations in Australian history. But here is what made the case immediately strange. The Beaumont children had not vanished without a trace. In the hours that followed, investigators began tracking down witnesses who had been at Glenelg Beach that day. And what they found was remarkable. Multiple witnesses had seen the 3 children, not lost, not in distress, but happily playing with a man they didn't know. A tall, slim man in his 30s with fair, almost blonde hair. He was athletic-looking, tanned from the sun. He spoke to the children easily, as if he knew them. The children were relaxed around him, comfortable. One witness saw him playing with them in the surf. Another saw him lying on the sand next to them. Around midday, a local postman saw Jane buying a pie from a nearby shop, something they couldn't have afforded with their bus fare alone. Someone had given them extra money. And then, around 12:15 in the afternoon, the children were seen walking off the beach with this man. After that, nothing. Police worked quickly to put together a description of the suspect. Witness accounts were gathered, and a composite sketch was released. The face of a lean, fair-haired man, looking somewhere between calm and unreadable. It was published in every newspaper in Australia. The response was enormous. Tips flooded in, the phone lines ran hot, but none of the leads went anywhere. Then came a detail that chilled investigators. Nancy Beaumont recalled something her daughter Arnna had mentioned a few weeks before the disappearance. Arnna had talked about a man she and Jane had met at the beach. A friendly man. A man who had become, in the words of a 7-year-old, Jane's friend. The children had met this man before. That changed everything. This wasn't a random abduction by a stranger who spotted 3 kids alone. This man had been building a relationship with the Beaumont children, gaining their trust, earning their ease. He had been preparing. The investigation escalated. Divers searched the waters off Glenelg. Dogs combed the surrounding suburbs. Police interviewed hundreds of people. A hypnotist was brought in to help witnesses recall details. A Dutch psychic, Gerard Creusot, was flown to Australia, convinced he knew where the bodies were buried. He was wrong. Weeks became months, months became years, and the Beaumont children were never found. Over the decades, several suspects have been named as potential suspects, though none were ever charged. The most prominent was a man known publicly as the Satin Man. In 2013, a woman named Grant Beaumont, no relation to the children, published a book in which she accused her own father, a factory owner named Harry Phipps, of being the killer. She claimed he had confessed to her. She described him as a predator who had access to the beach, fit the description, and had a history of disturbing behavior. Police took the claim seriously. Twice they excavated the grounds of Harry Phipps's former factory, a property just 3 kilometers from the beach. Cameras rolled. Australia held its breath. In 2018, during the second dig, investigators found what appeared to be disturbed earth beneath a concrete slab. When they broke through, they found animal bones. Harry Phipps died in 2004, and we will likely never know the full truth of what he did or didn't do. Another name that emerged over the years was Arthur Stanley Brown, a Queensland man who was eventually convicted in an unrelated case involving 2 children who disappeared in 1970. Brown matched the general physical description and was known to frequent beaches. Police investigated him seriously, but nothing tied him conclusively to the Beaumont case. The fair-haired man in the sketch has never been identified. It's hard to overstate how deeply the disappearance of the Beaumont children changed Australia. Before January 26, 1966, Australian suburban life operated on an almost storybook sense of safety. Children walked to school alone. They rode bikes to the park without parents hovering nearby. They caught buses to the beach on public holidays. No one thought twice about it. After the Beaumont children vanished, that innocence was gone. For weeks, people locked their doors. Parents drove their children to school instead of letting them walk. The idea that a predator could move undetected through a sunny public beach, charming children in broad daylight, shattered something fundamental in the national psyche. Australia believed it was different, safer, insulated from the darkness that sometimes broke through in other places. The Beaumont case proved that wasn't true. It also changed how police and governments approached missing children. Investigations became faster, public communication improved, Amber Alert-style systems, community awareness campaigns, and child safety education. Much of modern child protection infrastructure in Australia traces its roots, at least in part, to this case. The Beaumont children didn't just leave behind a mystery, they left behind a changed country. Of all the heartbreaking threads of this story, none is harder to sit with than the fate of Jim and Nancy Beaumont. They never stopped looking, never stopped hoping. Jim Beaumont spent years conducting his own investigations, following every lead he could find, meeting with witnesses and suspects, and self-proclaimed psychics who claimed to have answers. He died in 1995, nearly 30 years after his children vanished, without ever knowing what happened to them. Nancy lived far longer. She was still alive into her 90s, still waiting, still hoping that one day someone would come forward with the truth. That answer never came in her lifetime. Jim and Nancy Beaumont buried nothing. There were no graves to visit, no final goodbye, just 3 empty spaces in a family that never healed. The case of the Beaumont children remains officially open. The government of South Carolina has offered a $1 million reward for information leading to a resolution. Police periodically revisit the file when new information emerges, and every few years the case returns to national attention. Another suspect named, another excavation, another round of hope, followed by silence. Jane Beaumont would be in her late 60s today, Arnna in her mid-60s, Grant in her early 60s. They might have had children of their own, grandchildren, entire lives lived somewhere we'll never know. Instead, their faces remain frozen in the photographs from that summer morning. 3 kids on their way to the beach. Somewhere between the shoreline and home, they disappeared. And Australia has never forgotten. Subscribe and like. See you, my friend.